Howdy. Howdy. I'm so excited to be with you here today and talk a little bit about diversity. But before I tell you anything about myself, I actually have a question that I want to ask you about myself. If you had to guess, where do you think I come from?
Italy.
Italy. Germany. Oh, good.
Argentina.
Argentina. I love it. Ah. Thank you. Russia? Those are all really, really wonderful guesses. But I think the interesting part is that there was not actually a consensus. There were so many different opinions, right? And there wasn't an obvious response, an easy way to pin me down and my ethnicity. For somebody who's fairly generically white and doesn't have much of an accent and also has a last name that's not really reflective of their ethnicity, my current last name is a courtesy of my wonderful husband, it's really hard to pin down where they come from. I am actually Ukrainian, not as in born in America to Ukrainian parents Ukrainian. I mean born and raised fresh off the boat Ukrainian. I came here only about 8 years ago to pursue my graduate education at ECU for my master's and then at Penn State for my PhD. When I came here, my experiences with cultural shock, adjustment to the new environment, and trying to figure out who I was in this new country were so profound that I did what any other academic would do. I made these questions the topic of my dissertation. I spent the next 4 years researching immigration, immigrant adjustment, and cross-cultural identity issues. And what I found was actually pretty traumatizing. According to Dr. Celia Falikov, who is a scholar as well as a practicing therapist, immigrants are about 4 times more likely to experience social anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and suicidal thoughts and actions, all because of their struggles in adjustment and their struggles with identity. Why does it get so bad? Other pair of scholars, Iyer and Jedin, they try to offer us a little bit of an understanding by suggesting a concept of identity continuity, which is basically a connection between who we were in the past to who we are now. They show that identity continuity is an integral part of our psychological well-being. And the physical act of relocation to another country massively ruptures identity continuity. To understand why that happens, we need to understand a little bit more about identity. Jean Finney, who is a leading scholar in the area of identity and ethnicity, says that identity actually has 2 different components, an internal component and an external component. An internal component basically is who I think I am. An external component is who you think I am. But since there's really no way of getting into somebody else's head, it's really about what I think you think I am. Does that make sense? Right? And so for me, for example, that would be thinking of myself as a Ukrainian through and through, but also realizing that people around me don't see me that way. I'm pretty sure my own husband thinks that I'm fairly well-adjusted American and expects me to behave and think accordingly, but I'm not American, and I never will be because I came here so late in life. And so the closeted Ukrainian within me suffers from continuous non-recognition. And when so much of our external identity becomes misplaced, this is when our internal identity starts suffering and we start experiencing all of these psychological issues. Just how much of the external identity can be misplaced? I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to show you an image, and I want you to just think to yourself about what you see in this image. This picture was shared at a graduate research seminar on critical thinking here at Texas A&M. And the speaker asked the exact same question: what do you see in this picture? I think I said something along the lines of, well, there's a man on the side of the road fixing a truck, something very obvious like that. And then other responses started coming in, and somebody said, well, this is a third world country. I'm like, why would you say that? And they said, well, look at the colorfully painted walls. I was like, that looks like pretty much every other street I saw in Hawaii or in Palm Beach. Somebody else mentioned, well, look at how dilapidated the truck is that he's fixing. I was like, you trying to tell me there are no dilapidated trucks in Texas? Because I get stuck behind one every single day in Houston. And so I played the devil's advocate like that for a little while until one comment came in, well, this can't be in America because Americans are not creative and they're wasteful and they wouldn't try to fix this truck and they would just throw it away and buy a new one. I really didn't have much to say after that. Because when you have so much assumption and judgment flying in the air, there's really no appropriate way to respond to that. So I would like you to return back to the things you thought when you first saw this picture and see if you made any of the assumptions about this situation that were not readily present in the image. And now knowing how much psychological distress it can bring to people when you place those assumptions of external identity on them, is it even ethical to do so? Let's go through some brief statistics. Just in the United States, the number of immigrants increased from 77 million to 244 million between 1960s and early 2000s. At this point, about 15% of the population here is foreign-born. But if you really think about it deeper, if you're not Native American, that means your family came here from somewhere. And that means that, with different lengths of time, all of us in here are immigrants. So how is a nation formed then? How do we bring together all of this diversity to create this beautiful tapestry that is the American society? The process through which immigrants or any people adjust to another culture is called acculturation. John Barry created a theory of acculturation, and he suggested that there are 4 different paths to acculturation, depending on how much somebody is willing to acquire the host society's culture and how much they're willing to maintain their own home culture. So for example, if somebody comes to the US and believes that their success depends on becoming as American as quickly as possible, they would pursue the path of assimilation. If, on the other hand, somebody comes in and they completely reject the host culture, they only talk to people from their own culture, they consume their own media, they live in ethnic enclaves like Chinatown and Little Italy and Brighton Beach, they are pursuing the path of separation. The most psychologically stressful scenario is rejection of both cultures, called marginalization. It's similar to a feeling of, I don't yet belong here, but I no longer belong there. It's a very psychologically difficult place to be. According to Barry, the most labor-intensive, but also the most successfully adaptive path is integration, where an immigrant literally picks and chooses the best qualities from different cultures to become the most successful, unique individual that they can be. I decided that pursuing US education would make me successful here. But there will not come a day when I'm gonna give up Ukrainian food. So I pick and choose things that make me successful. So this is already complex, right? We have people that can default to any of these 4 paths at any time. What brings another level of complexity to the diversity that we face today is that people come to us from countries who have different levels of cultural distance to this society. A Dutch sociologist, Geert Hofstede, created a model of cultural differences and said that there are actually 6 dimensions on which cultures differ from one another. There's individualism, collectivism, masculinity, femininity, long-term versus short-term orientation, power distance, and uncertainty avoidance. 6 different dimensions with a scale from 0 to 100. That's a little bit of diversity, if I've ever seen one. So to keep it close to home, I'm gonna give you an example between Ukraine and the United States. What Geert Hofstede did is he took on this massive project when he went and surveyed countries all around the world and developed scales. And there's a very nifty online tool where you can go and plug in 2 countries and it will show you just how different on each dimension those countries are. So for example, on power distance, the US is very low. This is a society where equality, freedom of speech, speaking up for yourself are very highly valued, right? Students get participation points for speaking up, challenging the professor, asking questions. In Ukraine, a professor walks into the room, the class stands up and doesn't sit back down until the professor says it's okay to do so. So the level of power distance is very different. Similar with individualism, collectivism, drastically different scores. Ukraine has spent 70 years being part of the USSR, and the collectivist ideology is still very much alive. The United States is a textbook example of an individualistic culture. Similar differences exist for masculinity, femininity, uncertainty avoidance. Americans are risk takers. There's so many inventions that have been done here because people are willing to take risks. We're gonna fly and crash a bunch of planes, but we're gonna be the first people who's gonna lift off in the Outer Banks. Ukrainians are much more cautious. What my husband thinks is a type A personality is really high cultural level of uncertainty avoidance. I don't just want to know you're gonna take out the trash, I wanna know when. I don't like uncertainty, right? Same with long-term and short-term orientation. We think about things in sort of more longer time frames, whereas Americans kind of go day by day, which is reflected also in the indulgence level. Ukrainians, because they're collectivistic and because they're long-term oriented, we're willing to forego instant gratification for some goal in the far future. Whereas with a lot of convenience and driving and bigger portions and lots of sweet things, Americans are known as one of the most indulgent cultures in the world. So with so much cultural difference, being able to produce an immigrant that doesn't really look or sound very different on the surface, how are we to identify ourselves anymore? If ethnicity, place of origin, cultural ties are no longer the defining pillars of our identity, then what is? And here in America, where so much of this complexity and diversity is present, how do we know what it is to be American anymore? We are such a progressive society. We develop technologies, we reach out into space, we call it our last frontier. We're saying we're gonna be on Mars by 2020. But I believe that it is here on Earth that we face our last challenge, our last horizon, which is a society of acceptance and non-judgment, a society where we don't build walls and don't praise separation, a society where diversity itself becomes the pillar of our identity. So on this Earth Day, I want to leave you with a challenge. As you go through your day, try to be aware and notice those moments when your mind tries to jump to assumptions and judgments about somebody else just based on a cursory look about them, and try to actually get to know them a little bit more. Because on the diversity horizon, all identities shine bright. Thank you.